Hello, and welcome to the Plague Prototype. Today we are going to discover how the arrival of a few ships changed the destiny of a continent forever. In October 1347, 12 Genoese galleys docked in the port of Messina. The ships not only carried spices, but also an invisible and lethal passenger. You see that the sailors arrived dying, with black lumps oozing blood. The inhabitants of Messina did not know they were witnessing the beginning of the Great Mortality. This microscopic organism was about to collapse the feudal system and redesign European society. Let's go with today's topic. The architect of this tragedy was not a divine punishment, but a microorganism, the bacterium Yersinia pestis. This pathogen originally inhabited the arid steppes of Central Asia. There it lived in biological equilibrium within wild rodents such as marmots. However, climatic changes pushed these animals to seek new territories, carrying the bacterium with them. The leap to humans occurred indirectly through the rodent flea. The fleas fed on the blood of infected animals. When the host died, the insect sought another food source and found the black rat. This rodent was a regular passenger in the Silk Road caravans. Thanks to the commercial stability of the Mongol Empire, the bacterium traveled thousands of kilometers undetected. You can imagine how the trade that enriched the world transformed into the perfect vehicle for its expansion. What was once an isolated outbreak on the steppe would soon reach the ports of the Black Sea, ready to devastate the European continent. The disease manifested through three nightmare biological variants. The bubonic version was the most common and was identified by painful lumps. These were swollen lymph nodes in the groin and armpits that reached a large size. Although the pain was extreme, some managed to survive despite the high mortality. Another variant directly attacked the lungs. It was transmitted through the air by coughing and allowed massive contagion among people. In this case, death arrived in a few days almost inevitably. This airborne propagation capability made the plague impossible to contain. Blood infection was the most lethal form. The circulatory system collapsed and caused the death of internal tissues. The skin turned black, giving rise to the historical name of the plague. These facets of the pathogen ensured that no one, regardless of their health, was truly safe. Faced with the onslaught of the bacteria, medieval medicine found itself disarmed. Doctors based their knowledge on the theory of the four humors. They believed that health depended on the balance of fluids like blood and bile. Observing the symptoms, they concluded that the cause was miasma. This term defined air corrupted by poisonous vapors and foul odors. To combat this ill, they resorted to methods that today prove ineffective. They performed bloodletting to extract the infected humor, further weakening the sick. Others tried to drain the swellings with poultices of herbs or organic substances. Desperation gave way to the iconic image of the plague doctor. His bird-beaked mask contained aromatic plants to filter the air. This leather attire sought to protect the professional from direct contact with the patient. However, none of this could stop the bacteria. The enormous gap between the science of the time and biological reality generated unprecedented social panic. When physical remedies failed, many sought answers in religion or in somber, astronomical interpretations. What began as a health crisis soon became a collapse of faith and the established order. The massive death of almost half of the European population caused an unprecedented demographic vacuum that fractured the foundations of feudalism. Until then, society was based on a rigid hierarchy where the peasant was tied to the land by obligation and tradition. However, with empty fields and rotting harvests, labor became the continent's most valuable and scarce resource. This scarcity granted survivors a bargaining power that was previously unthinkable. Serfs, finding themselves coveted by various desperate feudal lords, began to demand wages and currency instead of mere military protections. The system of serfdom, based on unwavering loyalty, collapsed before the law of supply and demand. Many peasants abandoned their villages in search of better conditions, breaking their social chains for the first time. What medicine could not cure, the economy transformed. This structural change not only brought an improvement in the standard of living for the lower classes, but also sowed the seed of personal freedom. The old pyramidal structure of medieval power crumbled under the weight of its own dead. Thus, the way was paved for a social organization where the value of the individual began to be measured by their work and not solely by their lineage. The drastic reduction in population transformed labor into a luxury commodity. The surviving peasants soon understood their new strategic value. They no longer accepted the conditions of misery prior to the pandemic. On the contrary, they demanded higher wages and better food rations. This economic pressure challenged European nobility. To curb this advance, authorities tried to impose repressive measures. In 1351, the English Parliament enacted the Statute of Labourers. This law sought to freeze wages at levels prior to the crisis. It also prohibited peasants from leaving their lands in search of better offers. However, these laws proved impossible to enforce given the desperate need for labor. The tension between the elite and the workers culminated in violent peasant revolts. These insurrections marked the beginning of a new intermediate social class. Artisans and small landowners began to prosper thanks to their specialized skills. The economy ceased to be based solely on land ownership. Now, capital and labor mobility defined the future of Europe. This change laid the foundations for a more dynamic and competitive mercantile system. While chaos consumed the rest of Europe, Venice, the great maritime power, understood that trade was its greatest strength and its worst enemy. To protect its survival, the city of canals transformed fear into the first organized sanitary infrastructure in history. At that time, the Grand Council created special health commissions with authority to legislate on life and death. The most revolutionary concept that emerged from this panic was quarantine. Originally, an initial period of isolation was imposed, but it soon extended to 40 days, thus giving birth to the technical term quarantino. This measure forced suspicious ships to anchor far from the coast to verify if the disease broke out among the crew. Venice also founded the lazarets. These were hospitals located on isolated islands where the infected were confined and goods were disinfected. The state took over the management of burials and prohibited the entry of objects from contaminated regions. These bureaucratic measures not only sought to contain the bacteria, but also marked the birth of preventive medicine. Government responsibility for public health was established, setting the protocols that still govern our response to modern health crises. The tragedy left behind a landscape of accumulated inheritances. As entire families died, wealth concentrated in the hands of a few survivors. This surplus capital financed an unprecedented explosion of creativity. The new patrons invested in art and knowledge to leave an earthly legacy in the face of life's brevity. The constant proximity of death profoundly transformed the European mindset. The memento mori movement emerged, an artistic expression that recalled the inevitability of the end. However, this horror generated an opposite reaction towards humanism. Society stopped looking exclusively towards the divine to focus on the potential of the human being. A shift occurred from a theocentric world to one where the individual was the protagonist. Thinkers rediscovered the values of classical antiquity. The plague acted as a violent catalyst that swept away obsolete medieval structures. From the ashes of the Great Mortality, the Renaissance was born. Thus, the greatest biological catastrophe in history cleared the way towards modernity in the West. The fragility of existence became the engine of a new era of discoveries and scientific achievements. The Black Death was not just an end, but a painful origin. It reconfigured our relationship with the state and science, demonstrating that public health is the pillar of every civilization. This tragedy taught us that human resilience emerges even in the deepest darkness. Today, its legacy lives on in every hospital and labor right we enjoy. Thank you very much for joining us. If you value this knowledge, subscribe to explore more historical events that forged our modern world. See you soon.